Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into ancient Egypt to explore the life of Cleopatra VII, the last active pharaoh. You sent in some excerpts from an encyclopedia article, and it's fascinating. This article really covers everything: her rise to power, her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and of course, her dramatic downfall. It's a story most people think they know from pop culture. But we're going beyond those Hollywood myths to uncover the real woman behind the legend.
Exactly.
You know, it's not every day you find a woman ruling in that time and place, wielding that much power, and leaving such a lasting impact on history. To help us navigate this complex story, we have a true expert in ancient history joining us today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Can you give us some context for Cleopatra's world? What was Egypt like during her reign?
Egypt under Cleopatra was a real melting pot of cultures and influences. To really understand her, we need to go back to Alexander the Great. When Alexander conquered Egypt in the 4th century BC, he ushered in a new era, the Ptolemaic kingdom, which was ruled by his general, Ptolemy Soter. This dynasty, Cleopatra's family, was of Macedonian Greek origin. So imagine that, a Greek dynasty ruling over Egypt for centuries.
Wow, so Cleopatra wasn't even ethnically Egyptian.
That's right. And her family, the Ptolemies, faced a constant challenge, balancing their Greek heritage with the need to appease the Egyptian population. Many of the Ptolemies, including Cleopatra's father, essentially became puppets of Rome, relying on Roman support to maintain their grip on power.
So Rome was already a major player in Egypt even before Cleopatra came to power.
Absolutely. Rome was expanding its influence throughout the Mediterranean, and Egypt, with its vast resources, was a prime target.
And how did the Egyptian people feel about being ruled by a Greek dynasty, essentially under Roman control?
It was definitely a complex situation. There were periods of relative peace and prosperity, but also times of rebellion and unrest. The Ptolemies had to walk a fine line, appeasing both the Egyptian people and their Roman overlords.
It sounds like Cleopatra inherited a very precarious situation. What were some of the specific challenges she faced when she ascended to the throne?
Well, she faced famine, economic instability, and a mountain of debt owed to Rome, thanks to her father's lavish spending habits. She also had to contend with the Gibiniani, a rogue Roman garrison that had been left behind in Egypt to supposedly protect her father's interests.
Wait, a rogue Roman garrison? What were they doing there?
The Gibiniani were Roman soldiers, originally sent to Egypt to help Ptolemy XII regain his throne, but instead of leaving, they basically became a law unto themselves, causing chaos and interfering in Egyptian politics. Having them around was a real headache for Cleopatra. It really demonstrates how Roman influence in Egypt wasn't always a neat and tidy affair.
So Cleopatra steps into this volatile situation with famine, debt, and a rebellious Roman army causing trouble. It definitely wasn't a smooth transition of power.
Exactly. She inherited a kingdom in turmoil, both internally and externally.
And then enters Julius Caesar. What brings him to Egypt? And how does this meeting change the course of Cleopatra's life?
Caesar's arrival was a pivotal moment in Cleopatra's story. He came to Egypt in pursuit of his rival, Pompey the Great, who had fled there after losing a major battle in Greece. Cleopatra's brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XXX, thinking he could curry favor with Caesar, had Pompey assassinated. But this backfired spectacularly.
It seems like a pretty risky move. Why would Ptolemy XXX do that?
He probably misjudged the situation completely. He underestimated Caesar's ruthlessness and his loyalty to Pompey, even in death.
So what happened when Caesar arrived and found out about Pompey's assassination?
Caesar was furious. He demanded that both Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII disband their armies and reconcile under his authority. It was a power play, asserting his dominance in Egypt. This is where Cleopatra seized her opportunity. Recognizing that Caesar was the key to securing her power, she orchestrated a dramatic meeting with him.
I think everyone's heard the story about Cleopatra being smuggled into the palace in a rug. Is that what happened here?
The story goes that she had herself rolled up in a carpet, or perhaps bed sack, and delivered to Caesar's chambers. It's a fantastic anecdote, though some historians believe it might be a later embellishment.
So Cleopatra literally sneaked into Caesar's prisons. It seems rather bold and risky.
Bold, yes, but incredibly calculated. The Roman historian Dio gives another account, suggesting Cleopatra met Caesar openly, using her intellect and charm to win him over. Whatever the truth, the outcome was clear. Caesar sided with Cleopatra.
I can only imagine the impression she must have made on him. What was it about Cleopatra that convinced Caesar to back her over her own brother?
Cleopatra was highly intelligent, fluent in multiple languages, and a shrewd political operator. She presented herself as a valuable ally who could help Caesar secure Roman interests in Egypt.
So she was more than just a pretty face.
Oh, absolutely. She was a force to be reckoned with.
And with Caesar's support, Cleopatra was able to consolidate her power in Egypt. But what about her brother, Ptolemy III? What happened to him?
Well, after Caesar backed Cleopatra in the dispute with her brother Ptolemy III, they ended up in a bit of a, well, you could call it a war. But Caesar's forces were far superior, and Ptolemy III ended up drowning in the Nile while trying to escape.
Oh, wow.
It was a rather ignominious end for a pharaoh.
So Cleopatra, with Caesar backing her, is now in a much stronger position. What were some of her key achievements during this time?
Cleopatra focused on stabilizing Egypt and restoring its prosperity. She tackled the famine, implemented economic reforms, and even dealt with that troublesome Gabiniani garrison.
I'm curious, how does she manage to get rid of the Gabiniani? They sounded like a real thorn in her side.
Caesar actually helped her eliminate them, incorporating some into his own legions and sending others off to other parts of the Roman Empire. This really shows you how closely aligned their interests were at this point.
Their relationship was definitely more than just a political alliance, right?
Oh, absolutely. Their affair was one of the most famous in history. Remember, Caesar was already married to Calpurnia back in Rome. But in 47 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to his son, Caesarion.
Wow, talk about a scandal. How did this affect Caesar's position back in Rome?
It definitely created tension. Caesar had no legitimate heirs with Calpurnia. So the existence of Caesarion raised all sorts of questions about succession. And Cleopatra wasn't shy about promoting her son's claim.
So she wasn't content with just being Caesar's lover. She saw this as an opportunity to advance her own ambitions and potentially secure a future for her son in Rome.
Precisely. And she wasn't afraid to leverage her relationship with Caesar to achieve those goals. In 46 BC, she even visited Rome with Caesarion.
That must have been quite the trip. What was the purpose of this visit?
Cleopatra was officially recognized as a friend and ally of the Roman people. Imagine an Egyptian queen welcomed in Rome. It was a brilliant move by Cleopatra, securing her position as a client ruler loyal to Rome, while showcasing her son, Caesarion, on the Roman stage.
Caesarion was still very young at this point, wasn't he? Was he actually seen as a potential heir to Caesar?
It's hard to say for sure. Caesar never officially acknowledged Caesarion as his son, but the fact that Cleopatra and Caesarion were allowed to stay in Rome, even residing at Caesar's villa, speaks volumes. It was a clear sign of favor, and, at the very least, kept the possibility of Caesarion's future claim to power alive.
Did everyone in Rome welcome Cleopatra? It seems like her presence would have been controversial.
Not everyone was thrilled. We have accounts from Roman figures like Cicero, who saw her as a threat. A foreign queen with undue influence over Caesar. It highlights the anxieties some Romans felt about the potential for a foreign-born heir.
It's fascinating how those ancient voices still echo today, with similar concerns about foreign influence in politics.
It shows you how these issues have resonated throughout history. But this period of relative stability for Cleopatra was short-lived. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated, and the Roman world was thrown into chaos.
This assassination must have had a profound impact on Cleopatra's position. What did she do?
Cleopatra was a survivor. She returned to Egypt and quickly consolidated her power, eliminating any potential rivals. Interestingly, her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIV, died under mysterious circumstances shortly after she returned. Some historians believe Cleopatra might have been involved.
So even amidst the turmoil in Rome, Cleopatra was making strategic moves to solidify her hold on power back in Egypt. She was facing challenges on multiple fronts.
Exactly. And the death of Caesar left a huge power vacuum in Rome. The Republic was essentially divided, with different factions vying for control. This is where Mark Antony enters the picture.
This is the beginning of another famous chapter in Cleopatra's life. Antony controlled the eastern territories of the Roman Republic, which included Egypt. What was their initial meeting like?
It was in Tarsus, a city in what is now modern-day Turkey. Antony had summoned Cleopatra there to discuss her role in the unfolding power struggle in Rome. And well, she made quite an entrance.
Yeah, I bet she did.
Cleopatra arrived on a magnificent barge, adorned with gold and silver, purple sails billowing in the wind. She presented herself as the embodiment of Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and beauty.
So she really knew how to make a first impression.
Oh, absolutely. It was a calculated display of power and allure. Antony was captivated.
I can see why. So their relationship was a mix of political strategy and genuine passion. How did this alliance impact both their positions?
Cleopatra needed Antony's support to maintain her control over Egypt and potentially expand her territory. Antony, smitten with Cleopatra and drawn to the resources of Egypt, saw her as a valuable ally in his own power struggles. within the Roman Republic.
I imagine this relationship wasn't without its complications.
Oh, absolutely. Antony was already married to Fulvia back in Rome, and his alliance with Cleopatra would eventually lead to a major conflict with Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir.
This is the rivalry that would eventually lead to the fall of both Cleopatra and Antony.
Yes, their relationship would become a focal point in the propaganda war between Antony and Octavian, with Octavian portraying Cleopatra as a manipulative seductress who was corrupting Antony and turning him against Rome.
It's fascinating how Cleopatra's gender and her status as a foreign queen were used against her in this power struggle.
Absolutely. She became a symbol of everything Octavian claimed was wrong with Antony, fueling the tensions that would ultimately lead to civil war. But before we get to that final conflict, I think it's important to understand just how powerful Cleopatra and Antony were at the height of their alliance.
Yes, I want to hear more about the donations of Alexandria. What exactly happened, and how did it impact the political landscape?
In 34 BC, during a lavish ceremony in Alexandria, Antony publicly declared Caesarion as Caesar's rightful heir and bestowed upon Cleopatra and their children various territories in the eastern Mediterranean. He essentially carved out a new kingdom for them, challenging Octavian's authority and further solidifying his own alliance with Cleopatra.
This was a bold move. What was Octavian's reaction?
Octavian was outraged. He saw the donations of Alexandria as a direct threat to his power and an act of betrayal against Rome. He used this event to further demonize Antony and Cleopatra in the eyes of the Roman people, whipping up public sentiment against them and setting the stage for the final showdown.
The donations of Alexandria were a turning point. It's almost as if Antony and Cleopatra were daring Octavian to challenge them.
It was a calculated risk that ultimately backfired. Octavian used the donations to paint Antony as a traitor, a puppet of a foreign queen, and someone who was putting his personal ambitions above the interest of Rome. This propaganda was highly effective, swaying public opinion against Antony.
So the stage is set for a showdown. What can you tell us about the Battle of Actium?
Actium was a massive naval battle that took place in 31 BC off the coast of Greece. It was a clash of titans, with Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces facing off against Octavian's fleet, commanded by the skilled general Marcus Agrippa.
Was Cleopatra present at the battle?
Yes, she was there, commanding a squadron of her own ships. This wasn't just Antony's fight. It was hers as well.
So what happened? How did the battle unfold?
The battle raged for hours, a chaotic melee of ships clashing and soldiers fighting hand to hand. During a crucial moment, Cleopatra's ships broke from the formation and retreated. Some historians believe this was a strategic maneuver to protect her fleet, while others argue it was an act of cowardice. That demoralized Antony's forces.
And Antony followed her.
He did. Antony, seeing Cleopatra's ships withdrawing, abandoned his own fleet and followed her back to Egypt. It was a decision that sealed his fate and ultimately led to their downfall.
What happened after the defeat at Actium?
Actium was a devastating loss for Antony and Cleopatra. Octavian pursued them back to Egypt, and their forces were no match for his legions.
So there was no escaping the inevitable. Did Cleopatra attempt to negotiate with Octavian?
She did. There were attempts at diplomacy, but Octavian was determined to make Egypt a Roman province and eliminate any potential threats to his power.
What about Caesarion? Did Octavian see him as a rival?
Caesarion, as Caesar's son, represented a significant threat to Octavian's claim as Caesar's heir. To secure his position, Octavian ordered Caesarion's execution, eliminating any possibility of a rival claim to the Roman throne.
It's a tragic end for a young man who was caught in the crosshairs of history. What about Cleopatra? Everyone knows the story of her suicide. Did it really happen the way it's often depicted?
The exact details surrounding Cleopatra's death are still debated. The popular image of her dying from the bite of a venomous asp has become almost legendary. But the truth is probably more complex. Some ancient sources suggest she might have used a combination of poisons or a poisoned instrument.
So the asp might be more myth than reality.
It's certainly a dramatic detail that has captured the imagination for centuries. But the method of her death, while fascinating, shouldn't overshadow the incredible life she led and the complexities of her choices.
It's a reminder that history is often more nuanced than the stories we tell. Her death, regardless of the method, marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the beginning of Roman rule in Egypt. What happened to Cleopatra's other children?
Cleopatra had 3 children with Mark Antony, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene II, and a younger son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. After their parents' deaths, they were taken to Rome and raised by Octavian's sister, Octavia, Antony's Roman wife. It was a gesture of reconciliation, perhaps an attempt to integrate them into Roman society and diminish any lingering threat they might pose.
It seems like a more merciful fate than Caesarians. Did any of them have a significant impact on history?
Cleopatra Selene II is a particularly interesting figure. She was married to Juba II, who was made king of Mauritania, a kingdom in North Africa. They ruled together. And she seems to have played an active role in governing. Through her, the legacy of the Ptolemies continued in a new form.
So even in defeat, Cleopatra's lineage found a way to persist. What about Cleopatra's legacy as a whole? How was she viewed by the Romans who wrote about her?
The Roman accounts of Cleopatra are fascinating, but they must be read with a critical eye. The writers, often influenced by the political climate of their time, tended to portray her as a manipulative temptress, a foreign queen who seduced Roman leaders and threatened the stability of the Republic.
So there's definitely a bias in those accounts. How do modern historians view Cleopatra?
Modern scholarship has taken a more nuanced view. Historians recognize that Cleopatra was an incredibly skilled politician and diplomat who navigated a very complex and dangerous world. She was intelligent, multilingual, and adept at using her charm and strategic acumen to advance her own interests and those of her kingdom.
We've learned so much about Cleopatra today. It's amazing how one figure can be viewed so differently, depending on who is telling the story.
It's a reminder that history is always written from a particular perspective. By exploring different sources and interpretations, we can gain a deeper understanding of the past and the complexities of the people who shaped it.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a new perspective on Cleopatra. She was so much more than the glamorous figure we often see in movies and plays. She was a brilliant strategist, a shrewd politician, and a devoted mother who fought tirelessly for her kingdom.
Her story is full of triumphs and tragedies. It's a tale of ambition, love, betrayal, and the enduring power of legacy.
For you listening at home, we hope this deep dive has given you a fresh look at this iconic figure. Think about how Cleopatra challenged the norms of her time and wielded power in a male-dominated world. And what do you think about the way her story has been told and retold throughout history? We encourage you to continue exploring and share your own insights. Until next time, keep diving deep.